Okay, we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Wendy, you want to take the roll call?
Mike Hobson. Marilyn Ertley. Here. Deborah Nelson. Don Vanny. Dan Schwitty.
Here.
Justice Nichols.
Here.
Michelle Blythe.
Here.
Mike Hobson.
Here.
Deborah Nelson is excused.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the City Council retreat agenda as proposed.
Second.
Question?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, so welcome to our 2021-22 budget retreat. I'm going to introduce and turn it over to Steve Peifel, our moderator today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. It's always a pleasure to be with you virtually. You know, apologize in advance. I'm staying in a rental outside of Columbia Falls, Montana. It's a fairly rural setting. My Wi-Fi has been acting up a little bit, so hopefully I'll stay with you for the entire meeting. Otherwise, I know that Paul is going to be leading the vast portion of the presentation, so I'll be hanging on as much as I can while we do this remotely. And I think just like the last Zoom retreat that we had, which was I think the first one, I guess I would again ask everyone to remember to raise your hand or be recognized so that you can speak, so we make sure that everybody has a chance to speak in turn and everybody has a chance to get whatever questions you have answered. Same rule as the last time. We don't have a parking lot per se, but if there's something that's strikes your interest or that you want to make sure we cover before the end of the day, make a note of it and we'll try to cover that at the very end of the afternoon if we can. And also remember to turn your microphones on or turn your mute off so that we can hear you when you do begin to speak. Any questions that anyone has? If not, I'll turn it back over to Paul. Paul, you can go ahead and start with the PowerPoint presentation on the budget.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. And thank you, Mayor and Council, and everyone who's joining us this afternoon to talk about the budget retreat. We did send the slides out in advance, and Wendy was gracious enough to deliver some hard copies to the council yesterday, so that I figured it'd be a little bit easier, like we did in the past, to follow along on a hard copy versus trying to share screens. I think most of the directors are also on the call today. So as we go through this, I'll try to answer your questions as they come up. So don't hesitate to ask. And if I can't answer them, we have the directors that could give sometimes a better detailed answer. This is the 2021-2022 budget retreat. So we're presenting an overview of the 2-year budget that we've just finished. It's a balanced budget. And we'll start by going over some of the overview and the assumptions that we used to put the budget together. So your next page in your slides is the 21-22 budget overview. There's 3 themes here that you'll hear throughout the presentation that we used to develop this budget. The first one is there's no new discretionary spending. So when we developed the budget, we worked with the directors through this. We added no discretionary spending to the budget. The next one is it was hold the line, very similar. Earlier this year in 2020, we asked the directors to make a 10% cut in their operations budget, looking at the revenue projections. We're carrying those 10% cuts into this new budget for 2021 and 2022. And the third one is fiscal sustainability. We've completed this budget. It is a balanced budget with the assumptions that we made right now. Like we always do, we're going to monitor this budget. Council will, as we go through it, council will get monthly budget reports throughout the year. And we will monitor and control, meaning we'll make changes as we need to keep our budget balanced depending on what the economy does. So then we move into some financial assumptions. The general revenue assumptions for the general fund. General property tax, we assumed a 1% increase plus new construction. We also assumed taking the bank capacity that we did for 2020. If you recall, last year when we were doing the budget, we did not take the 1% property tax increase. However, we did bank it, which gave us the opportunity in the future to take it when revenues were flatter. So the assumption in this budget is that we would take that bank capacity this year. EMS tax levy, 1% increase plus new construction. Retail sales tax, we assume 3% over the 2019 actuals. Ambulance utility tax will remain for 2021 at $15 per unit, and then is assumed that in 2022 will need to be raised to $30 per unit.
Are you going to cover that further about the $30 in 2022 as to why we're going to raise it? I mean, will that be covered later on?
Yeah, the farther we get into the presentation, the more detail. We're starting out really high level to kind of give everyone an overview of what we use, the assumptions we use to put the budget together. And as we move through the presentation, it'll get a little more detailed. And I believe a lot of those questions will be answered as we move forward.
Okay,
I should bring up that one of the assumptions that we made in the budget, and we'll talk hopefully later this afternoon about the RFA and the conversations that have been going on with the RFA committee. But I did want to bring up that the discussions that we've been having about the RFA would be that if it was approved by the voters, it would take effect in 2022. So we have built the 2021-2022 budget as if the annexation did not happen.
Okay.
Because we have to have a budget for 2 years. So the simplest way to do it is to budget as if the annexation was not going to happen. If the annexation does happen, then we would amend the 2022 budget to reflect the changes in both our revenues and expenses. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
So you will see that what we're projecting is the ambient utility fee in 2022. If the annexation was not to happen, that ambient utility fee would go from $15 to $30. Back when we set the ambient utility fee up, we talked about that every few years there would have to be an increase in the ambient utility fee or increases in property tax or some combination of both in order to keep up with expenses. So we have just in 2022, without the annexation of into the fire district, we have hit that first threshold where that fee would have to go up. So we'll talk in more detail about that as we move through this. Water, sewer, and storm, we're projecting no rate increases in this budget. For the cemetery, also no increases. Airport, we are adjusting land lease by the appraised value, which we do. We appraise the airport property every 5 years, amortize that, those cost impacts over the 5 years, and incrementally raise or lower the lease rates based on that information. The buildings that the city owns on the airport are a little bit different. We don't appraise the buildings. We just raise those leases by CPI. So your next page is the general fund expense assumptions. Again, no new department discretionary spending. So we have no new programs projected in this budget at this time. The 2020 discretionary spending reductions that we made carry over. So we're carrying that 10% reduction that we made in 2020 into the next biennium budget. Liability insurance premiums, we're seeing an increase, about 4.3% is what's programmed for 2021 and 5% for 2022. Property premiums, that's another, the insurance we cover on our property also is increasing, 9% for 21 and 5% for 22. We assumed no lodging tax grant program. So the LTAC program that we normally have grants for, we're suspending for 2021 because of the COVID. The funds are not, the revenue is just not coming in to support that program. If funds become available, we can at a later date we can update that. Art Fund awards. We continuing the Art Fund program for both 21 and 22. Next page is expenditure assumptions for staffing. Salary adjustments per the union contracts. We'll have one more year left on our union contracts, and we're obligated with them for some cost impacts to salaries. Medical premiums, we were looking at about a 7.5% increase in 21. Dental premiums increased by 3%. And then we just want to note in here in the staffing, some of the reductions that we made in 2020 that we're carrying over into this staffing wise. We did eliminate a shared administrative position this year as part of our cost cuts to make that 10% from our operating budget. So we're not proposing to fill that position. We also had 2 vacancies. We had a vacancy in the communication manager's position. We're not proposing filling that position at this time. And we have 1 open position in maintenance and operations that will go unfilled. There are some new positions, 4 new positions that are programmed into this budget for 2022. We had a police support officer that was part of the 5-year plan staffing model for police department that remains in the 2022 budget. And we're proposing 3 FTEs in fire to be half of the staffing for an additional BLS unit. That was also something we discussed when we were putting the public safety 5-year plans together, is we knew that our BLS unit 847 was reaching saturation point and we would need to add a unit. In the budget, we're proposing to add a second BLS unit. It would be staffed half with full-time employees, thus the 3 new FTEs, and half by part pays. Both of these are revenue dependent. So if revenues drop or they're outside of what we projected, those positions would still be on the table for discussion. However, based on the assumptions we're making now, they are in the budget. The next slides move into our capital improvements. The first slide is Very general, just gives you some by department or by function capital improvements that we have going and where the source of the funding comes from. I want to note here, probably the most important takeaway here is that if you look at the bottom line total, we're doing over $41 million in capital improvements over the next 2 years that are in the budget. However, all of the funding that funds this is grant dependent or comes out of restricted funds. So we are keeping up on capital improvements, but that money is all coming out of restricted funds that we couldn't otherwise use for operations. The utilities, there's $18 million in utility improvements as part of that. That is coming out of operations funds from utilities, but that is restricted to utilities only. So those are kind of the two big takeaways on that page. I also did want to mention that besides keeping up on our capital with this $41 million investment, this is also an economic development tool for the city, because this is $41 million worth of projects that are getting put out into the community for private construction. So we are putting money into the community. We'll go into more detail on these projects. That's why I went over it pretty lightly on that slide. The next slide just represents the projects that the airport is working on in 2021. $167,000 for their obstruction survey and $715,000 in fencing. 2022, a little over $3 million for improvements overlay on runway 1634. These projects are about 90% funded by FAA grants. We say that because there's some flexibility in how they calculate that. We've also been in the past eligible for some WSDOT grants that have usually even come in a little bit higher. So we never seem to end up paying more than the 10% that we have reflected in here. Many times we end up paying much less than the 10% match. Next page is the parks. 2021 for the parks, we did put $100,000 out of our parks mitigation funding to do some improvements at Evans Field. We've been working on trying to get grants for Evans Field for several years and have just been unsuccessful getting that project funded with grants. The field is really at the point where I should back up. Most of that field was done many years back as a community project. All the fencing, the backstop, and many of the components in the field were all done in wood because it was 90% a volunteer project, and it is all past its useful life. And so we did budget this year to replace some roof, backstop, fencing, and some ADA playground, just because this park is at its useful life, the amenities in it. And if we don't fix the stuff now, we'll be looking at closing that park, unfortunately, just because it's not going to be safe in the future. So we budgeted for that out of parks mitigation funds. Again, would be restricted to capital only. Annually, we put $10,000 a year into the parks fund for safety and other repairs to the park. There's a laundry list of a few things that'll happen next year with that. We're going to continue that $10,000 annually to keep up with our parks repairs. Most of that is stuff that would be safety concerns if we did not budget for them. Next page, capital facilities. Council authorized the issuing of $5.5 million in bonds in 2020 for the construction of a new fire station, police impound facility, and upgrades to the M&O facility. Currently, we're working off a budget. The fire station did go out to bid. It is under construction now. The company has had their notice to proceed and started late in September. We budgeted $4 million for the construction of Station 48. And we've budgeted $1.5 million to construct a police impound building and upgrades to the M&O facility. Like I said, construction of Station 48 started late in September, and it's scheduled to be finished about a year from now in 2021. Under economic development for 2021, we've budgeted $205,000 for phase 2 of the Innovation Center. This is a grant-funded project. We're applying for state capital funds to complete that. That would put a new roof on, new concrete exterior paint, some remodeling in the foyer, and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. These are items that we were just not able to fund out of the phase 1 revenues that we had. So we're going back to the state and asking for a second phase of state capital money to be able to complete that project. The other economic development project that's in the budget is $150,000 each year for fiber connectivity. As you're aware, we've had conversations about the desire to connect all of the city buildings with our own fiber network and to be able to work towards providing a more reliable and cost-effective accessibility to the public. To do that, we want to be able to get at least pathway conduit in the ground when we have other construction projects going. So the idea is when the ground is open, when we have a street tore up, we put the at least the fiber conduit in the ground at that time. So we have it. In order to be able to accomplish that, we've budgeted out of REIT funding the $150,000 each year to be able to keep up with that as we do our transportation and utility projects. Which brings us to transportation and utilities. If you turn your page to the map, Jim Kelly, our Public Works Director, has provided us with a map of the projects that are on our transportation plan for this year. This is all of the projects for utilities, transportation, and pavement preservation for the year. You can see the projects are numbered on here. Those numbers correspond with our transportation capital improvement plan that the council looks at annually. Last year we adopted it as a 20-year plan. Normally it's been a 6-year plan, but we're trying to project farther ahead. So if you want to take a deeper dive into these projects, like I said, those numbers correlate with that plan, so you can look on the plan and see more detail about it.
The public that's listening, that plan is also on our website.
Yes. Good point, Mayor. Thank you. So for utilities, we have water main replacements. We have a water treatment plant design and construction to increase our capability of water treatment. The Glen Eagle Reservoir repairs, wastewater basin improvements, wastewater membrane replacement, and the Prairie Creek culvert. Those are the utility capital projects that are within the 21-22 budget at a budgeted amount of $1.4 million. Oh, I'm sorry, in anticipated grants. So that's also grant funded. The next page is the 3 transportation projects that we have budgeted. 173rd, it's a project we've talked about for many years. It's broke down into 3 phases. The proposed construction of this phase would be in that area of Smoky Point behind Best Western and the new senior apartments that are going in there to make the connectivity to 40th Street, which is project number 2 on the list, 40th and SR 531 intersection. That's a grant funded signal to put signalization in at the new 40th Street and SR 531 to give circulation between the north side of SR 531 and the south side. Third project is the SR 530 that's on the north end Island Crossing roundabout that we've been talking about quite a bit for the last couple of years. Now we're coming kind of to the conclusion of the presentation piece of it. As I said before, We're going to monitor the revenues and expenses. Council will continue, like always, to get monthly reports on both. And so we have plenty of time to talk about them. And we'll be watching them really closely so that we can make any adjustments we need to make in a timely manner. Our hope on the bright side is that the economy does bounce back, and we're projecting or programming for the spring retreat that we can all get together and talk about program requests and goals and adding new programs to our budget. So if the economy holds in the good condition, that'll be our discussion for April. We also have some potential budget adjustments pending the outcome of the RFA discussions. Next steps. So like always, we put a calendar together so that you know when things are coming forward. October and November and into December are always busy for the city council as you're approving budgets and amendments. And so we will schedule for October 26th. We'll have a recap of the budget. On November 2nd, council will have a public hearing on the general property tax and EMS taxes increases. We have a follow-up on the November 9th. Adoption of the property taxes on November 16th. And then on November 23rd, a review of the budget amendments for 2020. As part of the budget process, as we have to true up the current year's budget before the end of the year so that we end the year on a balanced budget. On December 7th, we'll have the public hearing on those amendments and ask council to adopt them. Any questions?
Paul, on the fiber, the 150,000 a year.
Yeah.
Are whoever hooks into it, are they going to be paying us, or are we supplying fiber to just anybody who hooks up? I'm not clear.
There's many different models out there for the connectivity or the Wi-Fi broadband service in a community. We haven't really got there yet. We want to get the pathways in the ground. First concern is to be able to hook the city buildings up so that we're not relying on leasing fiber connectivity. We lease a great deal of connectivity ourselves because we don't have the pathway to have fiber between our buildings. That is becoming an increasingly expensive way for us to operate. So it's much more cost effective for us to have our own. In the meantime, putting that conduit in the ground gives us the opportunity to go in several different directions in the future if the city decides to be able to provide some kind of a pathway. And I'm being very generic because there's so many different ways this can happen. From us just leasing pathway or fiber to a provider, or the city providing broadband on its own, or partnering with another agency to provide broadband. There's many ways it can go. Right now, the focus is we just need to get pipe in the ground while we have the ground open, so we don't have to go back after we've put new roadways in and cut them up to put conduit in the ground. So it's just a way of piggybacking on existing projects to get that fiber in the ground for the future.
Okay, but we still have to pay for internet, correct? To somebody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, I think you got a question.
Yeah, two real quick questions. On the Innovation Center project expected to be funded by a grant, what grant is that?
That's state capital funds.
State capital funds, okay.
That's the grant we're applying for. That's the funding that funded phase 1 of the project. And so we're asking, they're very aware that we weren't able to get everything done that we wanted to do in phase 1. And so we're putting in for a phase 2.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I had on that Glen Eagle reservoir improvements, that's not the HOA that takes care of their, I guess maybe I'm thinking of storm sewers or storm ponds or something different than that.
Jim can address if you have specific questions. I can in general tell you that no, it's not that. The reservoir is located in Glen Eagle, so it's dubbed our Glen Eagle or our 520 zone because it's at 520-foot elevation above sea level. It's located in Glen Eagle, but it doesn't have anything to do with Glen Eagle HOA. It's part of our water system.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for staff?
Don, you're muted if you're.
I just noticed that. Sorry I'm late. I got stuck in traffic getting home from Linwood.
Easy to do on a Friday afternoon. Did you have a question or?
No, just finally getting in.
Anything else, Mayor, or would you like me to move on?
No, I just want to point out that with the council, the books that you've got some further pages in there that go through the details along with Kristen's fantastic notes, budget notes on it. So hopefully that was helpful information to you.
And like always, our door's always open. Kristen and I are happy to answer questions as you read this and digest the information. Marilyn, did you have a question?
I did. On parks, we have down $10,000 per year for safety repairs to parks.
Right.
So that's coming out of the park mitigation fund. Is that correct?
No, that's coming out of our normal general fund. We budget that every year. I just really wanted to point that out, that we were going to continue with that forward with those repairs. We always do. We've incrementally tried to raise that, but we put that into effect a few years ago. Council's approved that. It's just so that we continually make improvements on our park amenities. It's mostly taking care of playground equipment, and putting safety chips down or irrigation and things that just keep they're bigger than our day-to-day maintenance projects, but keep our parks in good condition.
So do we have, I know the park board does an annual tour of the parks and makes suggestions for, things that could be improved or whatever. And so I'm wondering if the $10,000 a year is an accurate amount for what truly needs to happen over the next so many years or on a yearly basis. Do we have something that's kind of more defined for every park?
Yeah, we are working hard on putting a parks replacement schedule together that gives us a better projection over a long period of time of the life expectancy of the amenities in the park. This is a way to keep up, and the projects that are decided are a combination between what our parks inspectors that do the safety inspections on the parks list as things that need to be repaired, and the things that the Parks, Arts and Recreation Committee look at every year and make suggestions on improvements. Some of the things that they make suggestions on are not reflected in that because they're easy, smaller pieces that are just programmed into the M&O's normal work schedule as a project. These are specific to keep up on safety, so they're a little bit larger projects.
Okay. Then the other thing is, I know in our park mitigation fund, we have a considerable amount of money in that fund. And I know there are restrictions on what you can use that money for, such as property acquisition and capital type projects. So, and also on park mitigation money, there's a timeline for using that money. If you don't use it, I believe you have to return it. So, I would like to see, I know the park board wants to discuss this, using some of that money towards a park at a community park at Smoky Point. So that will be a topic that will be discussed at the park board. I know it does fall in with the Smoky Point Boulevard master plan, and that they could coordinate. But that would be coming forward. You know, I think from the park board is very interested in that. And so I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that how that fund works, and, you know, that you're very restricted on what you can use it for. And again, if you don't use it, you lose it. So
I think there's an interest in having that discussion. I sent an email out to council. You probably remember, just suggesting that we have a joint parks planning and council meeting, just for everybody to go over it and have that very discussion.
I think that's an excellent idea. Thank you.
We will get that scheduled. As we just looked at, our schedule is really tight for October and November, but my thought is offline, we can maybe look at starting an hour early or something one night and programming that in before the end of the year.
Yeah, is there a 5th Monday ever or not? Do we have something?
There is, but we also have our joint meeting with the school district on that 5th one.
Okay, so that's going to happen, huh?
We're planning for it.
Okay, well, that's good.
It's probably important for the council to hear from the school board on their
Yeah,
challenges and what their plans are going forward.
absolutely.
Jessica, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to segue off of Marilyn's discussion. That was something I was kind of looking at too. Having 1.7 million in the parks mitigation fund is pretty substantial. I think we could do something with that. Probably the most needed thing right now, and I don't know how that would work, but I'd love to discuss somehow, is using a tiny bit of that to get rid of the house that's on the York property. So at least it's not affecting that park. And I know Michelle brought up the idea of possibly expanding the zoning to make that a larger park. So that may be what first step would need to be in order to use the park funding. But either way, just thinking if it's roughly 30,000 to tear down the house, I think it could come from that fund. And then at least it helps the neighborhood with safety. And then also it will help that park.
Michelle?
I did some research on this also and had a couple meetings regarding zoning, and we don't really have to rezone to expand that park. But I think the more I talked to different individuals and gathered information, seems like it wouldn't take a lot of that park mitigation funding to expand and build something nicer for that that neighborhood and then all the other apartments that are going up. And looks like we have about 1.7 maybe-ish, somewhere around there in the parks mitigation fee. And I mean, I don't know, it sounds like that's enough to buy at least some land in Smoky Point to get a second park. So I think it sounds like a terrific idea all the way around to build something better at York and use those funds. And I think we have 10 years to use those funds from when they were deposited. And to build another fabulous park in Smoky Point. And then, I mean, and then it's the best of both worlds. So I would love to proceed further on that too. And I think once you get the property, you can then request grants for the building the park. So sounds like it could be pretty achievable. Maybe Marlon, you won't have to wait another 20 years.
I hope.
But it sounds like the funding is there and the potential grant money is there to do both deals. So, yeah.
Is this for our joint meeting? Do you want staff to prepare what we can to address these at the joint meeting when we schedule it, or?
How long were you thinking it would be till we were going to do the joint meeting, like a month?
Yeah, I just threw out before the end of the year. We get through, the this month and next, in November, things start quieting down a little bit. We can certainly start looking for a date that works for the members of the commission and council to hold that. Like I said, we could always start an hour early on a evening and before a council meeting or something, if that's what you desire.
Works for me, whatever works to get everyone around on the same meeting.
We'll start working on a date and time.
Is there, oh, I forgot to raise my hand. Is there any issue with the fact that the council voted to surplus that property for sale and the revenue was to go for park? Do we need to change that? If I don't have a problem with enlarging York Park if that's what everybody wants to do, but I feel that we really need to do a community park as the Planning Commission and the Park Board and the council had recommended in the past. So if we're going to change that a little bit, I just want to make sure, I don't know, Steve might have the answer to that. And then does demolition of a house, does that qualify under park mitigation money? Steve?
The zoning for that area, that's why it was on the docket to be rezoned, because it's currently zoned public, semi-public, which is appropriate for park space. That whole piece of property was zoned that when the park was originally developed. So the zoning would not have to change. City council did surplus the portion of that property.
Right.
Presumably we would have to go back and reverse that and take it off of surplus if we did move forward with in making improvements to it.
That was my question, basically. Do we have to fix that?
Michelle, did you have another?
I have a question. Can Chief Kraske burn it down as far as a training for the fire department? Or is there asbestos or something? Or
It's not of value to burn it as a training. We looked at that
oh,
some time ago. The way the house is built, and yeah, there is some asbestos and things inside it that just make it cost prohibitive to burn as a training exercise. It would have to be abated and then demolished.
If we were going to expand that park, I really would like to hear from that neighborhood, whose neighborhood park it is. I know when I doorbelled there, that park did not have a favorable impression on the neighborhood. They did not like it. I was surprised at the number of complaints, so we certainly should bring them in to any discussion before we decide if we would expand a park there.
I totally agree. I mean, every public hearing or public information thing that we've ever had, not one person from that neighborhood participates. They are not interested in the park. They don't like people coming from elsewhere there. That it's just been it's weird, but it's just they don't embrace it like some of us might. So
that was my impression too.
I think you're right, Barb, to make sure that the neighborhood is in favor of this, because I don't think they really.
Yeah, there's lots of areas in the city we could add park space, and we really certainly should do it in place where our residents want to see it and would use it, and it would be then a benefit to them.
Totally agree.
Michelle?
are you planning on going door to door? I mean, did we do that when we were looking at building a 3-story apartment building there? I'm just wondering how you would, other than send out cards letting them know that there's a public notice, how would we do that? Or would we do that in a different manner now because we would prefer not to build a park there? So I'm just curious how we would canvass that area and get their feedback if it's different than how we do a public request for meeting now.
We would have to discuss that and put a plan together, but we'd probably do mailings or, certainly start to put it in the e-news and other places that people look for information.
Any other questions?
Paul, are we going to go over the executive summary? I have a couple of questions on that.
Oh, we sure can.
Okay.
Yeah. Believe Kristen's having internet issues, and so I think she is phoned in now. So we won't have video of her, but if you want to ask specific questions about the executive summary, she's also available to be able to answer them for you.
Well, actually, I think you can probably answer my first one. On North Olympic, where we're paying $270,000 a year for the property, and that was before my time. So could you tell me what property that is? It's under REIT 2 fund.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, right, too. Could you reference us what page you're on? Yeah.
The pages aren't numbered. It's under REIT Fund 2.
Jan, I'm back. I don't know if anyone can hear me, but Jan, were you referring to the debt payments on North Olympic out of the REIT 2 fund?
Yeah, I was wondering where the property was and how much we paid for it. I mean, because it's before my time, I just curious.
I would have to go back and look at the original bond issue. That was the North Olympic improvements that went downtown. That was also before my time. I don't remember the original bond issue, but that's what those debt payments are related to. I think it was back.
It's the North Olympic project. So that is when we reconstructed North Olympic, 2007.
That's right, 2007, correct.
Okay.
We redid Olympic Avenue, and it was
Okay.
It was a utility street project, city general fund project. So those debt payments are for the street, the general fund obligations.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I thought we had bought property.
There was a property purchase that was part of that. I actually don't think that was rolled into the bonds. What you might be thinking of is, at the time, the city bought the property north of the post office. There's an espresso stand and kind of that occupies that gravel lot. That's owned by the city. It was purchased prior to the Olympic Avenue project to first offset parking down at that end of town while we were doing the construction, and to provide some laydown area. And so that was its original intent. After the North Olympic project, we spent many, many years negotiating with the post office as a property trade to keep the post office in downtown, but allow them to be able to construct a new building. As you know, that's never come to be. And we have recently, in the last couple of years, been just toying with the idea of what could go in there and what would be a good economic drive for the downtown area that could occupy that property. Currently, we do get some rent money off of it from the espresso stand. They were there before we bought it, and they've been a consistent tenant. They don't lease the whole piece of property. It is still dominantly public parking, but we do have a lease with them that allows them the use of it for their espresso stand.
Council also vote to sell that property when they were looking at all the properties in surplus York Park.
Yeah, it is on our surplus list, so that if we do find a use for it that's viable for downtown, we can move on that.
Okay, I just was thinking, with that amount of money each year, that property must have cost a fortune. But since you told me that it was Olympic Avenue, I have one other question you're probably not going to want to hear. The cemetery fund, and most cities don't own the cemeteries. They're owned by mortuaries, other things. And I was wondering, has the city talked about trying to get maybe our family mortuary funeral home here to purchase that so that we don't have to do everything that we're doing right now for it?
Yeah, we've looked at several different things. We have had some conversations, low-level conversations about a private entity taking over the cemetery and operating it for the city. It's just has not been financially feasible for them. Jim can speak to it more, but he has worked with some outside vendors to try to get the landscaping and the burials and things accomplished by private companies rather than M&O, just to take some workload off of M&O. We've been pretty successful with the landscaping, but just have not been able to find somebody to do the services for us. So it is stuff we are looking at. It is unusual. There isn't very many cities that operate a cemetery, and I don't know of any of them that operated in the black, to be honest. It's not a operate in the black kind of business for the city.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, or I actually want to just pop back when we're talking about the Smoky Point Park. I think which we all kind of agree, we need a central civic space in Smoky Point to benefit that growing population. Before we meet with all the commissions and start making decisions, what would be helpful is to direct the staff to give us an idea of what a park would look like and what those costs would be, marrying it into the West Arlington sub-area plan that we developed with a lot of community input 5 years ago, and then the Smoky Point corridor plan that's currently being done. So having those pieces of information and sort of a more detailed plan from the staff, I think would give us something really solid to talk about when it comes to funding and where funds could come from and what projected costs would be.
I think you're totally right. Mark Hayes, Community Economic Development, is standing on his head, but he joined us, and Mark has been working on that at some level. So I think we can prepare some information for that discussion. Do you have anything to add, Mark?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm in conversation with a consultant about working on a architectural plan for that park, conceptual. So we'll be doing both a plan view and a 3D rendering of what that community park could look like. And we're going to place it onto some properties that have been identified that we are in conversation with the property owners on for a park site, so that you'll get a true representation of what a park may look like, community park may look like in the along the Smoky Point Boulevard.
That's great. I think that would be a piece the council needs to have further discussion and consider where to go. Particularly when we're presenting a 2-year hold the line budget. So
yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Mike raised his hand.
Mike, and then Don.
Yeah, I have a quick question again on the, this time I'm looking at the added police support officer position. I see it came up before, and it's also come on this page that we're currently on, the executive summary. And what does this support officer position entail? Do you have any, like what position is this? What kind of position are we talking about here?
Chief and Juron on the line.
Yes.
I'll hand this over to you because you'll be able to explain the job function much better than I can.
The police support officer is a position that is a partially commissioned person, so they're not a full commissioned police officer. They're partially commissioned because they can issue they can issue parking infractions. So the goal with the police support officer is to take lower level functions away from the police department to free up the officers to respond to the more serious 911 calls that are holding. So calls that are considered less priority, such as animal complaints, parking complaints, picking up statements that are ready for pickup without suspect contact, things of those type of things. They also spend a lot of time with projects, different types of projects for the officers, the investigations. They run evidence to the state crime lab and back rather than tie up an officer. And they do a lot of vehicle maintenance for us. With a fleet of vehicles the size that we have, every day there's vehicles that need to have maintenance done to them. So it doesn't make sense to send 2 officers down to Everett to drop off a vehicle. And the reason you'd have to send 2 is because you'd have to bring them back, the officers back. So a police support officer can function in that role as well. So it's somewhat of a cost saving measure, and it also tries to keep the officers available for higher priority type calls.
Okay, thank you very much.
Don, I think you were next.
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. The first one in the EMS fund, of course, the utility fee. We got it under, it looks like ambulance service fee. I see a notation there saying only like 8,484 units at the $15, and then an additional, it looks like 1,053 that are discounted. So is that saying out of our population of Arlington that there's only 9,500 people that are paying this fee?
That's how many units that are being billed. So of our population of 20,000, we bill about close to 7,000 residences, business, multifamily housing. So, you know, there could be four people in a house, but that would be one utility service, if that makes sense. So that the number of units doesn't necessarily equate to population. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it just seemed low to me for that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then another quick question. It looks like just in the general fund. I just wonder if this is a necessity. I see it looks like fireworks stand permit fees. We got $300 in our budget. I thought we weren't going to be doing any fireworks, so I wondered why we would need.
We have one more year.
We got one more year.
Yeah. Council approved or banned fireworks this year. But it's 365 days. So we have one more 4th of July before.
Okay. Okay. Then but I see it looks like it was still listed for the 2022, 2023 or 2022 budget.
We can remove that. I'll make a note.
Okay. I was just curious on it.
Michelle? You're on mute, Michelle. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Didn't we ban fireworks before July 4th of 2020 so that we were done? I mean, didn't we schedule that meeting so that the 365 days would have already been completed before July 4th, 2021?
That's my recollection as well. We did it.
You're right. I might have been.
We did it in June.
I think I misspoke when I said that. So we might have to take that out for both years. So I apologize. I believe you're correct. We were shooting to get it done prior to July 4th so that we didn't have that. That didn't come up. So apologize. I misspoke. We don't have another year. New Year's will be the last legal opportunity.
Yeah, no worries. It's $300. It wasn't, but I was just wanted to make sure the firework date. Thank you.
Jessica?
I had a question for Mark first. If all the development goes through for 2020 and 2021 that's on the books now, how much is estimated in mitigation fees?
I don't have that number available. I'd have to go through and look at every project and assemble what the unit counts are and what they're looking at for mitigation. So I do not have that mitigation number available currently. We can put it together for you, but.
I guess even just like a rough estimate would help. Like, do you think it will be in the hundreds of thousands or maybe even the millions?
About park mitigation specifically, Jessica, or
What's that?
Which type of mitigation are you asking about?
New development?
So you're talking about park mitigation?
Mitigation or traffic mitigation?
Well, I was gonna.
If all the
What's that?
residential development occurred, would probably be somewhere in the $500,000 range for park mitigation.
Okay. Well, part of why I was asking, so the next question would go to Paul, was I was surprised by how much we had in our ending fund balance for the public art fund. The fact that we have 160,000 in there is pretty substantial considering we're only needing about 10,000 for upkeep. I know we had a little bit more expenditures because of some bigger projects, but I feel like if we paused that 160, that could last us several years and still allow us to purchase new. And, you know, if we do get a new park in Smoky Point, that new art could go there as well. It's just a substantial amount of money. And so I wanted to know from Paul if we freed up the 2020, 2021 funds that would typically go to the public art fund, could that go to paying for like a communications position, which I understand is a long-term cost that you would be paying with a one-term fee. But I also know that when you put money in the general fund, it frees up other money. So I'm just wondering if maybe we could do a moratorium on collecting any additional public art fund and use it towards some positions we need to get filled right now. And then we could come back to opening that moratorium up if the fund got low and we needed more.
Well, certainly the art fund it was created by ordinance by the council, and the council has the authority and control to modify that, you know, basically any way you see fit, either suspend it or terminate it or reduce it or whatever the council feels they can do. The idea of using those funds for replacing a position really kind of goes against our financial policies that we put into place that say we won't use one-time revenues for ongoing expenses like that. We consider construction-related sales tax, which is what funds the art fund, is one-time revenues. We know when the construction you know, slows down or really significantly drops off, we lose those revenues. They don't last forever. Potentially there would be other uses you could put that money towards that was one-time thing. The remaining portions of the construction-related sales tax goes into our capital facilities projects. Those are considered one-time expenses that we fund things that we can do our facilities repairs, and they funded design of Station 48, things like that. If that answers your question.
Well, it kind of does, because it shows that we could use it for other needed things. I'm kind of looking specifically for a way to cover staff costs for a short period of time. I was just trying to think of a creative way to do it.
For that communication manager position, just so you know, Sarah with her communications degree has stepped in on the daily communication, and then we outsourced a contract, which is far more cost effective for the bigger pieces of communication with Logan Consulting. And that's been way more cost effective for us than somebody on staff.
Operationally, that would not be my high priority. If I had funding to be able to fund open positions or create more staffing, that would not be my first priority, to be honest with you. Maintenance and operations has been one of the only departments that we have not, you know, raised their resources in. And that would be a higher priority to me on a staffing level, regardless of what council decides as far as expending funds.
Marilyn had her hand up.
Marilyn?
Well, first of all, I think that's a terrible idea. Sorry, Jessica, but I just don't think that's an appropriate way to fund a position with temporary funding. So we passed this ordinance to take the 10% of new construction cost sales, I guess. And so now the Public Art Committee is prepared to meet. They have put a lot of work into this, and they have numerous people have submitted their applications. And I believe we have agreed to approximately $65,000 a year to fund these projects that from the community that they want to see enhance our city. So to take that money away after all the hard work and of the the commissions, the public, artists, people who enjoy the city, that art brings people to our community, and therefore then they want to be here more, spend money here, just enjoy a beautiful town. So I can't imagine why we would go back on our decision to fund public art. That's it.
Maybe when we have our
So
joint
just
meeting, the Arts and Recreation Commission can talk to the council more in depth about what their plans are and what that funding means in terms of what they're trying to provide for a livable city.
And just to clarify, I wouldn't take away the 160, and I didn't know we had promised 65,000 a year. It was more just pausing it at the amount it's at right now, because even if 65,000 a year, that's still a good 3 years almost we could cover. So that was just my thought.
Michelle, did you have your hand up?
I did. I mean, I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, don't get me wrong and jump all over me, Marilyn. I love the art, and I think we need that, right? But I think it's an interesting way to think about it. Like, could some of that be used once you build a park, and then you put some of your artwork in the park and make the park even much nicer? And so I think that's interesting, and I think it because the balance is so big, which is why it does stand out. But I personally don't think it's such a terrible idea, but I'm not saying I don't want your art fund or your art out there. But I think it is an interesting way to kind of get around and see how you might be able to have that help parks or a park or something else. I don't know. I kind of did things like that in business a lot, look at different ways to move money around to help an area that might not be doing as well right now on a short-term basis. So I think when you talked about it, Jessica, I understood it that you maybe just want to do it short-term, but I thought it was kind of interesting.
It's always good to have creative ideas and brainstorm and think of ways that, you can shuffle things around and come up with a little money for something, especially in the times we're having right now. But it kind of, the fund isn't as large as it appears, because like I said, next week, all of these projects are being voted on and approved by the Public Art Committee to bring forward. And so it's 65,000 more than it's going to be soon. So, it isn't as much. And like Paul mentioned, it's not sustainable funding. It depends on construction. So if we have a dip in construction, then we have a dip in the fund. So
certainly could have the Parks, Arts and Recreation Commission, as they have done in the past historically, look at funding public art in the parks that make the parks more interesting. Done quite a bit of that in Legion Park, and then funding in the roundabouts that are going in that give those a higher aesthetic appeal, and also kind of helps slow traffic down, calm traffic, to take advantage of the art. So there are some things that the arts do that do feed into our parks and our transportation projects. So I think this speaks more to the need for a joint meeting with the council and the commissions to get a bigger scope and understanding of the work that's being done and where it's at in progress.
So as far as just direction for staff, is this a topic then you'd like me to add to that joint meeting so that we have that discussion when we meet with Parks and the Planning Commission and Council? Does that make sense?
Raise your hand if it's a yes so that Paul can get it.
Are you saying to discuss the public art? I'm not sure exactly what you're.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with discussing it.
Any other comments or questions from council on this or any other topic? Jan?
Are we discussing the budget sheets that were in our packet now? Is that my understanding?
Do you have a question or?
Yes, yeah, I do have
by all
one,
means.
but I wasn't sure if we were there, but that it seemed like we were. On the police department, I know that we're spending over $1 million a year by arresting everybody. But I had a question about we're going to not be using the Marysville jail and going to the Snohomish jail instead, and the additional expense that will be. Is that correct? Am I seeing this right?
We transferred, if you remember last year when we changed courts, it was actually the beginning of this year. That was to be able to change the jail. We were not, Jonathan can go into more detail if you'd like. We were not able to get people into jail at the level that we needed to because Marysville jail is just overcrowded. We've grown, Marysville's growing, this whole area is growing, and so their jail capacity has just not been able to meet the needs of serving areas outside of Marysville. And so that had a huge effect on our ability to incarcerate people that we needed to. So we switched courts, which gave us the ability to switch to Snohomish County Jail, which allows the police department more latitude in being able to get people booked into jail that we need to. So you'll see that the line item for Marysville goes away in a sense, and the money's transferred into one. We always budgeted for both facilities. And now the county will be our dominant facility.
Okay, so
we had to budget for both in the past, Jan, because we couldn't rely on the Marysville jail having the space for the people we wanted to transport to jail. And sometimes people that we were required to put to jail based on the crimes, Marysville jail couldn't take them.
okay, and I that's coming back, and I remember that. When we transport to Everett, as opposed to Marysville, and I've been with a police officer when we transported somebody to Marysville. So when they transport it to Everett, is it 2 police officers? I mean, that's quite a distance. Can the new person, non-commissioned person, could they transport, or does that have to be a commissioned police officer?
It's transported by a commissioned police officer. We don't have a transport car. We don't have that. Just don't have the staffing for a dedicated car to do that. It's transported by the police officer. It is not a 2-person transport. It's 1 person.
Okay.
In most cases. And I wanted to just say, when we did cost analysis, when we made the transfer of courts, which allowed us to transfer jail, and there was some slight changes just in booking fees and stuff. Ultimately, the county was very slightly underneath the cost of Marysville when you looked at booking and court fees, and everything rolled up into one. But the cost difference was so small, we didn't use that number as a benefit when we talked to council about it, because you would never ever see a cost savings, because of course the number of prisoners we book continues to go up at such a rate that fund never goes down. The cost always increases every year. So you would never see a savings. However, case by case, there would be a slight savings going to the county from Marysville at this time, based on the rates today.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Mike?
Yes, I guess we're here on our schedule here. I'm looking at our numbers, looking at the 2019, I'm looking at revenues right now for 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022 on that page. And I'm just wondering how these were arrived at. Because on 2019, for instance, total revenues were, I'll just use round figures here, about 21 million. And this year, 2020, it's down to 19.5 million. But then in 21 and 22, it bumps back up to almost 23 million in 21 and almost over 22 million in 2022. So the revenues are actually up a little bit from 2019, which I think was a banner year, if I'm not wrong. And so I'm wondering, with all we're going through in the country, with the economy and the pandemic and so on, why these numbers appear to be just as high or even higher than 2019, and how these were arrived at. That's my question.
Well, I can answer that. So one of the things you have to consider is sometimes we get grants in one year over the next. So for example, we have a grant that's coming in on the Innovation Center, which we may not get in another year. So that always causes a fluctuation in revenues. We are anticipating an increase in some of our revenues like property tax or sales tax, but then some other items like our telephone tax has been decreasing. So that's a decrease over what we budgeted. So when the net effect isn't always a stable increase or decrease, because each individual line item can do something different depending upon what the economy is doing. So kind of generally what we look at to come up with our revenue assumptions is we do look at trend, we do look at the economy. The property tax is a little bit more straightforward. We're limited to the 1% plus new construction, but there's a lot of different factors. We have so many different revenues that are coming in that we really look on an individual basis, kind of what that's been doing over a period of time, what the economy is doing. The other big driver of our revenues is the CED department. So depending upon what's happening with the construction, that can definitely make our revenues fluctuate. So we are anticipating a similar level of growth. So that's why our revenues will be higher or consistent to where we've been. Does that make sense?
You might also mention the per capita revenues as the population grows.
Yes, exactly. The per capita. So our population and most of our state shared revenues, our per capita went up a little bit, as well as our population. So those revenues would be consistent or higher.
Okay, yeah, that makes some sense. But when I look at these, and I'm looking at the ending balance numbers now too, which are down somewhat from this year, 2019. But again, after 2020, you go to 21 and 22. And the ending balances look pretty strong, not quite as strong as the revenues, but pretty strong. So I guess what I'm questioning is, and I'm not really questioning, I'm just challenging just slightly, is there such a demand for a hold the line budget or a cutting things when our revenues appear to be pretty strong? And I know this is a judgment call. But I'm just, again, trying to look into that to see where we stand when it comes to actually spending our money over the next 3 years.
Well, I'd like I know Paul probably wants to answer this too, but what I would say is, I don't know if I would be confident enough to say at this moment in time that our revenues are strong. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. There's still a lot of uncertainty with how deep and far that will affect our revenues potentially. I know there's been a recent announcement by Boeing that could potentially impact our local economy. So I think our budget is reasonable. It's conservative, but I think there's still a lot of uncertainty that I don't know if our fund balance is going to maintain intact by now and the end of the year, again, depending upon what's happening with our economy. So at this point, I'm feeling like it's a realistic budget with still a lot of unanswered questions about what's going to happen between now and maybe even this time next year with how the pandemic plays out.
Just reiterate, Mike, that the council does get financial statements every month. So if there is an earlier than projected rebound in the economy, or we see some real strength coming back to this region at a rapid rate, we'll see that on a monthly basis and be able to react to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, and it does look, it does look strong when you start looking at bottom lines and our revenue and our, ending fund balances and stuff. But, what I look at when we're going through this is the ability to preserve services to the community. And especially in light of if we do have shortfalls or drops in revenue. All the predictions that I can find out there are saying that our economy is going to suffer somewhat from the pandemic and the economic stress that's on it right now. We've all seen that have been around here, have seen what happens when Boeing lays off people and the influence that has through our economy. We are very aerospace dependent, and it's not necessarily the 900 people from Boeing solely, but all of those first tier suppliers. Many of them are in Arlington, about 30 some of them are in Arlington, that it has an effect on. I was really shocked Monday night. I took a breather between work and council just to get out of my office for a short time and kind of drove around town, because now that we Zoom to everything, I don't feel like I get out of my office and I, at least got to see that there are other things going on in the world. But I was really shocked when I drove through Jensen Business Park. It was sad to see no cars in AMT's parking lot, very few, when it was just, 6 to 8 months ago when they were filling every parking spot and had 3 shifts going on. So that scared me in what the economy has to bring. The other thing that comes out of the predictions for this pandemic is that our downturn in the economy is going to be sharp but short. So it will be sharp in how deep the impacts are, much deeper than what we saw in the Great Recession. But the difference is the Great Recession slowly came into play, it bottomed out, and it slowly recovered. The predictions for this one is it's going to be a much shorter term. So it's going to cut deep, but it will recover fast. So that brings different challenges than what we saw in the last, Great Recession. In the Great Recession, we eliminated 19 positions from the city. That was from pretty deep cuts. We didn't bring all of those back even today. We've consolidated jobs. We've learned how to do stuff more efficiently. We've used technology. So we haven't replaced all those positions. We've learned to live without them. This one being a deeper cut, but a shorter duration, we don't want to get into a position where we have to reduce services or lay staff off, which go together. If you remember earlier when we were talking about like our capital and stuff, we're spending a great deal of money on capital improvements. However, almost all of that money comes out of some restricted fund. So therefore, if we have to cut, if the economy dips, the only thing we have between us and cutting services is our ending fund balance and our reserve funds. That's it. That's all the money we got. And unlike the Great Recession, where it was a longer duration and you didn't have a choice but to lay people off and look for other ways to get things done. In a shorter duration, you want to really avoid laying people off as much as possible, because in that short duration, you lay people off, they go find something else to do. And then guess what? You're trying to rebuild your staffing so you can bring your services back up in what was, really just a short-term consideration. So, we talked about, I hope that in April, that the economy is improving and these numbers come true and they look really good. And we're all talking about program requests and prioritizing new programs and stuff for the city. But the other reality is we could be talking about what cuts we have to do and how we have to redo how we do things so that the city still provides the services that it needs to and is committed to the community with what we have to work with. So this is just a budget. And, like on our first page, we talked about, we're going to follow this budget. We're going to be fiscal sustainable, which means we're going to monitor it and control it. And the way we control it is we control our spending to the best of our ability, and just watch it. So anyway, I hope that helped answer your question, Mike.
Yes, thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments from council?
Nice job, Paul. Good education for everybody.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, I sent out a second set of slides, some smaller ones that just was, if we had time, kind of budget related, but to start to talk about the RFA or continue those discussions. Over the last year, the RFA committee, which has been 2 council members and 2 commissioners from North County, Jessica and Marilyn have been our representatives on that, along with some staff support, have been working on the planning document for the RFA. And we've had a lot of updates in council meetings, and we got to have a council retreat on it in June. And so I think really the council is pretty well up to date on what's been going on with that committee. I'm happy to say that the committee really has finished the bulk of its work. Its mission and goal was to create a plan or to alter the North County's planning document to include Arlington annexing into that plan. And so they went over governance and how things would work and transfer of assets and debt and a host of things over the last several months that we've kind of hit on in updates in our retreat. And so over the next month, at the next couple of workshops, we're going to be talking about that with council and kind of going over the plan. Most of it will be review, but I did program enough time in there because I want council to feel comfortable with this. We have our next milestone and kind of our decision-making point. So at the next couple of retreats, or excuse me, next couple of workshops, we'll talk about the planning document. It's in your council packet that went out today, so you can, take a look at that at your leisure. We'll set aside some time at the next couple of workshops to work on that. At our November 2nd meeting, the council will discuss and have to act one way or another on adopting the plan, which is North County's plan, but it accommodates us annexing into that fire district, and to approve the resolution to put the annexation on the February ballot to give the voters the opportunity to vote whether or not they want to be part of the North County Regional Fire Authority. So the stuff I brought for today for us to look at was just because it tied in with the budget, and these are items that came from the discussion that we had back in June about kind of the financial piece, one portion of the financial piece of the RFA. So if you turn to after the title page, there's a estimated cost to taxpayers annexation scenario. So I kind of wanted to start, we'll go over that with council just to give you a picture of what we've put together. There's 4 columns here, starting at 2020 and showing you the different costs. It shows you the city general levy amount, the city's EMS levy, what the RFA's fire levy is, their EMS levy, ambulance utility fee. And the bottom line is really the one that, is to pay the most attention to. And that's the annual cost impact to a house of $400,000. So how $400,000. So how will that impact kind of the median or average house price? So you can see from 2020 to 2021, there's actually a reduction in that cost. And it has to do with our our property tax erosion. And that just happens over time. You know, we have to talk about that. Our property tax and our EMS levy erodes over time. The price per thousand ratio goes down. And so that's why periodically you have to look at your revenue sources versus your expenses and make adjustments. I.e., we've talked about, you know, in the past about our EMS levy increases to be able to keep up with those expenses, our ambulance utility fee increases to keep up with expenses. So you can see from 20 to 21, we've had a slight reduction in collection. So the actual tax went down a little bit. The 2022 columns, there's two of them. The left-hand column for 2022 is what would reflect if no annexation occurred. So these are our projections based on if we did not annex to North County and we kept our fire department in 2022. So as you can see, our general levy and our EMS levy continue to erode if no annexation. With annexation, the city's EMS levy goes away. However, our taxpayers then would be paying into the North County's EMS levy, which is at a little higher rate. So that's just wanted to make that note. Our ambulance utility fee, like we talked about in the budget, we're proposing that in the budget that ambulance utility fee go from $15 a month to $30 a month. That has to do with just the rising costs of providing the service. When we did our 10-year projections on the ambulance utility fee, when we put it in place, we knew that there were going to be times when that would have to be increased, or that we would have to increase our EMS levy to cover the cost impacts of just the rising cost of providing the service. This also has to do with what I mentioned earlier on aid 48 or 47, our basic life support unit hitting its saturation point. We knew that it was approaching that. We're projecting with the growth in the city that we'll see that exceeding its ability to keep up with the calls and the need for adding another unit. And so this does reflect in the budget the cost impacts of adding that unit at half of the staffing. So like I said, we would staff at half with FTEs, with professional full-time employees, and half with part paid staff. So you see that the total impact to the taxpayers on a $400,000 house. So no annexation, $996. With annexation, $1,056. So there's a $60 a month difference. So looking at this with the annexation, there's a $60 a month or $60 a year impact to a $400,000 house. The reason being is if you turn to the next slide, the general tax levy, this is a slide actually comes right out of our June RFA retreat when we talked about different options. And if you remember back, we looked at different scenarios with the city's general levy and what to do with the annexation. At what level do we set that tax rate at? What I heard from council, there was no council vote on this. This was just merely just a reading of where council sat on it. It seemed that council fell into the idea of retaining 82 cents worth of our city general levy rate in order to be able to have some funding to do some good within the community. And so that's reflected in this chart. That's where that $60 difference comes from. The 82 cents retained in the 2020 general tax rate still is a reduction of 50 cents in our overall tax rate. But gains the city about $677,000 annually in our general fund. So again, just talking with council. Oh, go ahead, Jessica.
I was just wondering if we went with the 82-cent option, where would that put us on the list of cities of Snohomish County for where we rank high to low?
We'd still be, I think, right in the middle. We can put that together and make a chart of that and get it out to council so you can see where we would fall. That'd
be great.
Yeah, no problem there. That'd be a good visual to look at. Jan?
Yeah, I have a question. So if we do the annexation and the RFA levy and the EMS levy, do they stay the same or will that go down every year? I mean, you know, because ours goes down and I understand why, but there's a permanent one?
No, theirs goes down too.
Oh.
They're all subject to the valuation. So when people's houses appraise or the value goes up, the amount per thousand because of the limitation of what you can collect goes down.
Is there anything at all we can do about that? I mean, is it legislated or what?
Yes, that was part of Tim Hyman's initiative to put a cap on the municipalities and counties' ability to raise property tax. So it's capped at 1% over what was collected the year before.
Yeah.
So as valuations go up, it means the per thousand tax rate has to come down to stay under that cap.
But doesn't that mean that we've got less money going in?
Theoretically, you're always within 1% because the valuations are going up. So you're getting a smaller tax rate on a larger valuation. Kind of a complex math
It is
problem.
a complex.
Yeah.
But the dollar amount erodes. You're only gaining 1% over the last year's collections. So where it's a shortfall, where it hurts on the budget is that really, you know, the cost of living fluctuates year by year. I mean, some years we're at 0 or in a negative, other years we're at 4%, but you can pretty much guess that you're going to be consistently 2.5 or 3%, you know, increase in expenses. So the cost of living just goes up that much. So when you're held at only being able to collect 1% more on your property taxes, which is a large portion of our general fund, which funds most of the city services, all of public safety right now, and parks and things like that. When you're
an inability to hold your expenses to less than 1% increase, you know, when your jail fees go up or your public defender fees or, you know, your utility bills go up, you can't control keeping those going up less than 1%.
That's what I was getting at. When your inflation rate is 3% and your revenue rates is 1%, and you have to provide the same level of service, you're losing 2% every year. So you're doing 2% less each year. So it erodes at the system over time.
If you remember in the budget we just went through, you saw a 5% increase in medical and health benefits for the employees. You can't keep those things under 1%, which is what you're limited to with your tax collections.
So down the road, if our expenses are more than what we're bringing in, then we'll have to come up with another funding source like we did with the utility tax?
Well, certainly if we didn't do the annexation, that's why you're seeing the utility tax jumping in 2021 to 2022. You're basically doubling. It's going from $15 a month to $30 a month. It's because we've reached that point. When we set the ambulance utility fee, you know, what we looked at was the least amount we could do that would carry us for a few years. So what ended up happening is that when we first implemented the ambulance utility fee, our ending fund balance grew rapidly because we were collecting more in that short period of time than what we needed to cover the expenses. But the expenses keep going up and the revenue was stagnant. So that reduced and it reduced and it reduced. Now we're at that equilibrium point where now the expenses will outpace the revenue. So we have to raise the rate in order to be able to keep up with the rising costs of expenses. Now that goes away if the annexation happens, the ambulance utility fee goes away because you've created a revenue source for fire and EMS. It's part of a junior taxing district. It's part of an RFA that levies its own tax rates to cover the expenses, the costs of doing business.
And Jim, on a broader philosophical issue, it's one of the reasons we have a focus on building the Cascade Industrial Center, because when you add job strength and family wage jobs to your city, you increase the purchasing power of the individual, because the other side of our tax equation is, of course, the sales tax. And so we present you these conservative budgets because we're always looking at what indicators in the count and are in the economy and what's going to be strong and not going to be strong. That's why Paul talked about looking for a sharp reduction in revenues, because we anticipate the individual purchasing power is what's going to be hurt by the pandemic. People losing their jobs, people no longer getting the supplemental funds to help carry their households forward. So they'll restrict their spending and we'll see a decrease in our sales tax collections at the same time. So this is, property tax is just one bucket of revenue for the city. So we continually tried to build in our initiatives strengths in the city that will help us raise revenue through people's purchasing power, for people going out and buying cars in our community or other goods and services.
And with the companies coming in, with as many people that's going to be employed just within the next 5 years, I would assume that that would also impact Marysville, Lake Stevens, and even Granite Falls. I had someone from Marysville, one of their council people, call me because they were arranging a job fair for veterans. And they want to use Arlington and the jobs that are coming in to point out what will happen. And I'm thinking that if I worked in the Cascade Industrial Center on 172nd, boy, I'd be stopping at a grocery store around here and spending before I drive wherever I live. So, okay, I understand. Thank you.
Michelle, I thought you had your hand up. Did you have a comment or question?
I do have a question. Barb, you were talking about livable wage, and what is the livable wage in Arlington? So the hourly wage that we would consider someone be able to, support a family. Do we know that?
I don't have the figures for Arlington, but I do for Snohomish County.
Okay.
And, based on the rising in housing, and it's about $22 an hour. And of course it depends on the size of the family or whether there's two incomes in the family, and that's just based on basic needs, housing, food. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Not your cable bill or brand new cars or anything else that you may need.
Thanks.
Mike?
Yeah, I just want to throw in one more piece to this discussion when talking about jobs and people buying things locally. That if we have people, we have a jobs housing ratio of what, 2 to 1, something like that. That at least that will be the case. And if the people that have those jobs, if they're not able to actually live in the area, they won't be spending their money here. And if they work here at the CIC, but they have to live in Mount Vernon or somewhere else, most of their money will be spent there. I mean, that's pretty obvious. So that's another reason why we need to try to balance that jobs to housing ratio a little closer, in my opinion, so that we keep those workers that we are employing here in Arlington to spend their money here in Arlington. just a piece I wanted to throw
I
in.
agree with you, and I hope you all had a chance to read the housing action plan and the housing needs assessment that Mark sent out, because I think our staff is pushing us right in that direction, Mike, looking at a range of housing and a mix of housing.
I did read that. I did
Yeah.
read that, and I liked it very much.
Yes, I think it's going in the right direction to address exactly what you're talking about.
Any other questions so far?
Good questions, though.
Yeah, so really, this was just kind of to you know, to start the conversations on it. Like I said, the feedback I got from council, we had kind of unofficially landed on the 82 cents as being a comfortable spot for everybody. We had, you know, there was some discussion here and there about what that could be used for, and I think overall the feedback that I was hearing is that the number one complaint that we're hearing out there in the community right now is road congestion. That's the number one complaint. I think we have good roads. You know, I think Jim does a great job maintaining. We have wisely spent the pavement preservation money. But to be honest, you know, we do the best we can on congestion and on relief projects, but most of that money comes from grant money. And so we're very thrifty about using mitigation money and anything we can find for matches. So the thought is that $677,000, at least for a while, could be very well spent on helping with some of the congestion relief projects that are out there. It would give us the ability to just have that much more money towards the project, just that much more money towards matches for projects that would make them more inviting for grant funding or low interest loans or whatever we have to do in the future to be able to fund the projects. The two that kind of floated to the top as being the most important, the most pressing ones that we have right now, SR 530 roundabout. We've talked a lot about that. And the 169 gap. 169th Street has been an opportunity that has been mostly developer driven. Mark Hayes has been working on that considerably. If you look in your packet, there's a map. It's about the third page that kind of shows you the gap. There's a red dotted area that's kind of highlighted in yellow. That's an area that will not be developer driven, but is the city's responsibility, and we'll tie the two together. We also talked about the 40th Street project being in our 2021-2022 budget as a grant funded project. That's that stoplight that you see kind of at the top portion of the page of the map, right above the red dotted line. This gap area ties two connections together on the south side of 172nd. It also ties 40th into there, makes circulation at the Smoky Point Safeway complex so that you have kind of a landmark across on the north side of 172nd. And then at 43rd area where Walmart is. So it makes a great connection down there. Mark could elaborate, Jim, if he's on, about how important this would be, you know, to accomplish, particularly prior to the 172nd improvement project, just to give circulation. But this project really solves a multitude of issues. So Mark or Jim, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I wanted to just make a comment that this 168th gap, just like the 173rd Street, is going to be able to provide an immense amount of relief when we start widening the 172nd project. Once that project starts, if you take a look at the 23,000 plus cars a day that go down that road, they're going to need an alternative route. The faster that we can get this missing segment completed and then get the developers portion completed, that will provide the community with a much safer route and much more efficient route to get through this area. That's all I had to add, Paul.
Mark, would you? think you're on mute.
We don't hear you. Your audio's not coming through.
Were you able to hear me, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay.
I notice sometimes when we're in a city office, if you get a phone call and you're on.
You hear me now?
There you are.
Work now.
You lose your audio.
Yeah, this is a critical link for our transportation system to tie these two together. As you know, the project, the Affinity at Arlington, has constructed that first segment from Smoky Point Boulevard and created that easterly leg at the Smoky Point Boulevard intersection. Two projects we have going on currently are the one that you see in the green. So that is the outpost is what it's called now, the 51st Avenue project that's going on there. The Cascade, the other area above that where National Food is now, the project there is called Project Roxy. That will be under construction beginning the first of the year. And so this other roadway section from our gap section at 43rd out to 51st will be constructed concurrently with those two projects going forward. To continue this down, so that gets us to 51st. To continue this down, we're in conversations with the North Point Development Group, talking about them constructing the continuation of this to the east from 51st over to 59th to help serve that project also. And so that would give us a complete roadway segment between Smoky Point Boulevard and 59th Avenue. That being coupled with the 63rd improvements that are going on really start to serve this area, and then the 173rd link also. To further that a little more is that with the Smart Cap project, we're looking at that leg of 173rd between 43rd and Airport Boulevard also. So just to give you a little background on some of the projects that are coming up.
I think it's exciting to look at it because those projects, should we use the money for this come to fruition, we'll get an expanded 172nd when the state's done with their work, doubling the amount of lanes there and adding a whole nother east-west connector that should provide some real relief through that corridor, particularly with all the job growth that's going on there.
I will add that back in the olden days, when we used to be able to meet face to face, Barb and I met with the Smoky Point business community, and we did a little presentation on this, talking about this in 173rd and the improvements that we were proposing for the Smoky Point area, but of course at the time didn't have any funding in place to be able to do them. This was a very exciting project to the merchants down in that area. If you have ever tried to get out of Starbucks or anything, and realize how hard it is, or if you've been in the Safeway parking lot or the bank, the Northwest Credit Union that's on the west side of Safeway there, and watch the cars stack up that are going out and trying to make a left across 5 lanes of traffic to in an uncontrolled intersection, this will relieve all that. So it was a pretty exciting project to the business community.
Jan and then Michelle.
On the extension of 169th, what about from 59th to 67th? Is that going to have to be a city one, or is North Point looking at running that? Because that would give a complete Smoky Point to 67th, complete bypass of 172nd.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jan. Unfortunately, there are some problems with getting to 67th. Several problems. One is we have to deal with the railroad. The other is that we have wetlands there. We have Edgecombe Creek, which is being relocated. And so that probably is not going to occur, at least not in anywhere in the near future. But we are talking to North Point about creating and placing a roundabout at the 63rd alignment on 172nd. So you'll have 59th, you'll have a roundabout, and then the 63rd intersection.
So you'll be able to either turn, go up 59th to that intersection or out of the North Point development, enter onto 172nd at that 63rd intersection.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle?
Hey, Mark, what is constructed wetland? And I see all the little blue lakey things. What is that? And did we build on it?
No, those are bad areas. The constructed wetland, so when that was developed in the county, there's high groundwater here. That is actually the headwaters of Hayhoe Creek. And so that's an area that's very well protected. It's a critical area. And so as part of the 169th alignment, we will have to deal with wetland issues as part of that project. But we are in conversation. There's been an analysis done on the national food property. So the wetland delineation has been completed. We know that there's going to be a Corps of Engineers 404 permit process for that, to put that roadway segment in there. So hopefully we'll be able to piggyback off of that review and that permitting in order to help with our 169th alignment also.
So any of those areas that have the blue, that coating, those are areas we're not permitted to build on.
Correct. Those are actual wetlands. And then there's a huge buffer, 150-foot buffer that goes around that blue area. So, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wetlands are not a popular thing for people in the development world.
I was gonna say, depends on who you ask.
Exactly.
So for the 169th Street project, if you're curious, there's a budget on the next page. There is some challenges with this project. So it's about a $3.1 million project right now with the information we have available to us. That's the budget that Jim's put together for the project. So you can see that the revenues would certainly not construct it the first year, but it does give us, again, another revenue source to be able to use as match money towards grants or low interest loans or whatever we have to
allow us to borrow the money to do it and have bond money, debt money to pay it back. So we could get it, pressed to get it done before the 172nd construction turns into total gridlock in that corridor.
The other high priority project is the SR 530 roundabout. We've talked quite a bit about that. I did include some illustrations, the newest one that Jim provided, along with a budget in here. The budget has increased since the last time. It was kind of shocking when I first saw it, and then I read through it and realized, well, Jim's getting closer and closer on design, so the budget's getting more and more accurate. He's also got right-of-way acquisition that in here. There's a significant amount of right-of-way. Some has to be purchased. Most of it is going to be, in kind to the project, so it won't actually be cash out of the project's coffers. We do have some partnerships on this project. Potential, the Still-Squamish tribes we're working with, Snohomish County, WashDOT, and of course us. We do have some partners and some joint funding sources for this project. It's continuing to move forward.
Interesting how we're talking about two major projects to relieve the hardest pinch points of congestion, and they both relate to state highways.
Yeah, very much so. Now, just kind of in conclusion on this, the reason why I brought this forward to you now, I put it on here so that if we had time, which we did really well on time today to discuss it. This is part of that package we're moving forward that council will have to make some considerations on. Particularly our hard date will be November 2nd as part of the vote to put this on the ballot and to approve the plan. However, there is some sensitivity to it earlier in that we've hired a communications firm. Council approved that before you went on break earlier this summer to help us message the potential annexation, to be able to get information out to the public, to educate them on what it means, what the service levels look like, and things that citizens can expect. That gives them the ability in February, when their ballot comes in the mail, to be able to make an educated vote on how they feel about annexing in or not. So I bring this up because this is something that certainly our communication team wants to be able to get this information out to the public once the council has decided that this is the way we want to go. This is the way we want to provide, congestion relief and have a solid funding source to be able to continue to work on that. That information would be important to get out to the public. So our communication team's going to want to know sooner than later what the council's decision is on this. So just wanted to kind of leave it with that thought in your mind, that we're going to be discussing it over the next several weeks.
I would like to know, is there anybody who would object to looking at utilizing the funding for these types of transportation projects? No?
That's very helpful to know that piece, because I can let our communication team know that we don't have any objections, and this certainly looks like the way the council would like to go.
And that helps that's going to help our taxpayers make an informed decision. If I make a decision and it's going to cost me $60 more a year, this is what I could potentially get out of this. And then that's that value they can weigh. So thank you for your feedback.
And that is all the material that I have for today. Thank you for listening to me for 2 hours.
Well, we actually thought we were going to listen to you for 3 hours.
In the Zoom meetings, we try to be so conscious of how long we have you sitting there.
Yeah.
We can't wait till we can all meet in person again. However, the governor just did extend the open public meetings through mid-November. So.
Oh.
And with our case counts rising. But if we have a couple minutes, can I throw something on the table I haven't talked to you about? Did you all get an email letter from the Snohomish County Health District?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was addressed to me and all of the council, that talked about the challenges that they've had with funding. They had to hire 70 contact tracers in order to try to stay on top of the pandemic and keep our numbers where the quicker they can contact trace and get people isolated, hopefully they don't spread the virus even further. And last year when we did our budget, we, and I agreed with this decision, moved our per capita funding from the health district over to the Family Resource Center to help with people directly in our community. And so that they're in the letter that they sent, we're asking for some consideration of per capita funding again, as they are operating with all this expanded personnel and work on CARES funding, want to be able to have some continuity. And I didn't know if that would be we had some additional funds in our CARES funding, if we would want to make a contribution, a per capita contribution this year with our CARES funding to the health district to let them carry on this important work.
I would like to see us do that. When I saw that, and I know what is going on with the health and with the added stuff that they've been doing. And I know with the resource center, we have given funds, but the health district, and to be honest, I wouldn't mind going back to that yearly contribution because health is too big of an issue. And we've got a county department that is keeping us informed and I think keeping us healthy. And I think we need to be contributing to that organization.
I agree, Jen. I'm hoping that's something that when we have our April retreat, we can revisit for the second part of our Bennion budget. I think I'm very comfortable staying conservative for that first year till we know how much our revenues will be impacted. But our opportunity here lies with the CARES funding, that if we don't spend it, just goes back to the federal government.
I think that would be an appropriate use of some of our CARES Act funds.
Absolutely.
Carolyn?
How much are we talking?
I think when we did it, we did 75 cents per capita. So that would be around roughly $17,000 or $18,000.
Yeah, I think it's well worth it.
Maybe we could just round it up to 20 and say,
Yeah, we could do 20.
I think that's a great idea.
Mike?
Yeah, I agree with Jan and everybody else on this. I think we need to get monies to the health district. I can remember when we actually removed money from the same amount of money from the health district, and I think we put it to the Arlington Community Resource Center. I really didn't, I was very uncomfortable with doing that in the first place. I thought both organizations need to be funded, and obviously the Resource Center has been a great, valuable asset during this pandemic. But yes, the health district, I totally agree. We need to reinstate that monies that we spend on them.
I think this pandemic has, there was some of the questions I heard from council when we took that money away is what do they do for us or what do we get for that? But certainly public health has been in the limelight more than we've ever noticed, and it's impacted all of us. So I'll have Paul bring a budget amendment for the CARES funding to the council at the next workshop. Can we add that? We will add it to Monday's workshop so we can.
Well, I think we can modify the budget that council just approved, as long as council's comfortable with this, with that contribution. We'll add that to the budget, and we'll just kind of continue to bring the budget back with modifications to it as we go, because this is really kind of an ongoing thing it's a short term because we have to have all the funds expended by the end of November. But things are kind of changing on a daily basis, and I think we'd have to bring you the budget about every day to make it accurate and up to date. So I'm just trying to think if we could do it just incrementally as we go. If council's comfortable with that, we know what the limit is on it, and we can just keep bringing you updated budgets and keep you informed on the expenditures.
To do it that way, I'd like to ask a question. Is there anybody who would object to making a contribution to the health district? Raise your hand. Okay, thank you. It looks like it's unanimous, so.
Yeah.
Thanks. Didn't mean to walk something on at the end, but I wanted to address that letter we all got.
All right, are there any other issues that we need to talk about today, council? Jan?
Since we have Mark Hayes on the line, we all got the email from the gentleman over by Jensen Park. Could he sort of bring us up to date on that? If he's still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. So the request is that the condominium association there has a fence line that's abutting the park property. They'd like to obtain an additional 5 feet of property for the yards and the place that fence in a new location. And so that's what the request is, to pick up that 5 foot width by the length of the condos there. I don't have the letter in front of me here, but so that's the request, is to purchase that small portion of property there off of the park site.
Was that, Mark, from what I understood in the letter, that was because the rest of the soil up to the creek or whatever was unstable to be able to put the fence up? Was that correct?
Yeah, that's what their request has been, that they have a hard time supporting the fence there.
Will that request go through the Parks, Arts and Recreation Commission? That would be appropriate, and they could make a recommendation to council.
Sarah and I are actually going out there next week to look at it, and then it will come before Park Committee.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Jan.
Any other items for the good of the order before we adjourn?
Oh, I hope
Madam Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Question.
Favor.
Oh,
Thanks for attending, everybody. Hope you have a great weekend.